Sound Cartel.
How can setbacks become stepping stones? And what does it take to lead a business through constant change? In this week's episode, performance consultant, Better Life Lab founder and author Andrew Horsfield explains how to turn setbacks into progress by embracing productive struggle and building habits that create lasting performance. Then Chris Power, an executive coach and leadership team coach, shares 3 practical leadership practices to help organisations stay competitive during times of disruption. From Sound Cartel, I'm Grace Jennings-Edquist, and this is Business Essentials. Why do so many capable people get stuck halfway to the life they want? Andrew Horsfield is a performance consultant, founder of the Better Life Lab, and author of a new book called Better: Escape Average, Beat Burnout, Own Your Life. In this conversation, Andrew discusses the challenging space between where we are and where we want to be. Andrew explains how to distinguish productive struggle from unproductive struggle. He also shares practical tools for gaining clarity and making better decisions, and he reveals why fear and self-doubt may actually be signs that growth is happening. To start the interview, I asked Andrew to define the messy middle of challenges and explain why so many professionals get stuck there instead of moving through it.
The messy middle essentially is that difficult space between, the life we have and the life we want. So where we are, where we want to be, who we are and who we want to be. And by nature, it's inherently difficult because we're trying to change something about ourselves or our situation, and that inherently is difficult and messy. So it's called the messy middle because often when we're stretching for something worthwhile and valuable, we find ourselves having to navigate that space pretty regularly.
Andrew, a lot of leaders experience setbacks but struggle to turn that into growth. I wonder if you could share with us what's one practical way to reframe a setback in the moment?
Yeah, I think we often frame setback as struggle and it's a bad thing rather than see it that it's a sign that we're working for something that's positive or moving our life forward. And so one of the things people can do, I think, is understand the difference between productive and unproductive struggle, because there's both. There's the unproductive struggle where we spin our wheels and we are putting in effort but not necessarily progressing or getting somewhere. And that can lead to frustration and failure and disappointment. And the productive struggle is that kind where with the right amount of effort and the right resources and the right thinking, we can be making progress even though that can sometimes be slow and it can sometimes be difficult. And a way for people to gauge which struggle they're in is simply just to think of a messy middle they might be facing now, whether that's career or at home or family or fitness, and think about that messy middle and over the last, say, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, have they moved forward in any way in that struggle that they're trying to deal with? And if they have, then they should probably keep going. They're probably in the midst of productive struggle territory and they're doing the right thing and moving forward. If they haven't moved or haven't shown any signs of real growth or movement, then they're probably in the unproductive struggle and might need to rethink their tools or tactics and take a different approach.
So, Andrew, you emphasise gaining clarity on what really matters. Could you guide us through this a little bit? How can busy professionals cut through noise and make better decisions day to day?
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? Because we are all busy. I think that's life now. And rather than that be a negative thing, I try and flip it to think that it's a positive thing. We're engaged in, family, friends, social things, community. Sometimes we might have an elderly parent that we're looking after. So the busyness of life, I think, is okay. It's just, are you busy on the right things and spending your time in the stuff that matters to you and motivates you? And so one of the things I encourage people that I work with to think about is just living life by a little bit more by design rather than default. And to do that, I often get them to think about 3 questions through their day, just sprinkled throughout the day. It could be a morning coffee, a lunchtime, and then in the afternoon. It could just be at the start or end of the day. But the 3 questions are essentially, what role are you playing? So are you a parent? Are you a CEO? Are you a CFO? Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a business owner? Are you a leader? Are you trying to follow the team rather than lead the team? So what role are you playing? And what that does is just helps us turn up to the whole intention about who am I being and am I being consistent in that role. So, for example, we don't want to come home and be the CEO when we walk home and say g'day to our kids. We want to be a parent or a dad. So we can make that transition really clearly. The other part is, what reputation do you want to have? Because often our reputation enters the room way before we do. And so that's not just about will you elbow people out of the way to get to the corner office, but it's what sort of energy do you want to bring to the situations and life that you're living? And what sort of person do you want to be seen as by those around you, whether that be neighbours, colleagues, other professionals within your network? So what is the reputation you want people to say about who you are and how you operate? And that helps to close that gap that we can sometimes have between what we say and what we do. And then the last one is, what's the result that you're chasing in the particular context that you're in? So a result might be about getting the next round of venture capital for the product you're trying to launch. It might be about being the parent that you want to be. It could be about being more patient with the people that are around you because you're working in a difficult team or a difficult culture. And so when you have clarity about the result, it's not just about a tangible outcome. Sometimes it's about an intentionality that you're trying to bring into your life. So 3 things: role, result, reputation. And those things, I think, help people move away from sort of the drift of life and bouncing from one thing to another to actually transition with a little bit of intention.
Andrew, I've been noticing there's so much talk in our kind of business leadership sphere about motivation these days, but your work leans kind of more into habits and structure. What habits do you think actually make the biggest difference to performance?
I have a love-hate relationship with habits, I think. I obviously believe that they are really helpful, and James Clear's done a wonderful job with his book of writing about habits. My work, and certainly the content of the book, is more about some of the practical things we can do on a daily basis, as opposed to feeling like we've got to spend another 2 or 3 hours crafting the solution to get to the practical action or outcome we're searching for. So one of the things I would suggest people think about doing is I don't think we take action is probably the first thing to mention to people. We often desire a better future without doing the work to deliver it. So we want a better team, but when there's conflict, we tend to talk in the cafe or the corridors rather than bring that conversation into the centre of the room, because it's difficult, and that's the point of the messy middle. So one of the things that I think people could do is, as a habit itself, is to improve the system that you're in. And what I mean by that is every system has something that it values. So if you're in traffic, it values flow. And if you're in a team, it values honesty and performance. And if you're in a business, it values profit. If you're in a family, it values love. And so what you can do as a daily habit to help you live a better life and live more on purpose is just to add value to the system that you're in. So in that relationship, bring love to the relationship. If you're in traffic and it's busy, then let someone in and merge and help it keep flowing, or leave the T intersection free so another car can merge rather than block up traffic. If you've got a difficult culture that you're part of, be the change that you want that culture, or represent what that good culture looks like in the way it looks like for you. So taking action and doing the work, I think, is a lifelong habit that can go a long way to getting us where we want to get to.
I want to take a slight sidestep here with my last question, because it's about self-doubt, which is something that even high performers sometimes deal with. What separates those who act anyway from those who stay stuck in this self-doubt?
Yeah, I think it's such a hard thing, isn't it, Grace? Because, if we think about that word imposter syndrome, here we are, you get lots of things on LinkedIn or social media about, I don't know if you've seen it, but that little growth framework around comfort zone and stretch zone and where your result zone is. And so we're pushing people to get outside of what's comfortable, what we know, where our experience is. And then as soon as we jump out into that space, we call it imposter syndrome, that we're actually imposters and we shouldn't be there. It's a difficulty. So again, I reckon there's a problem in our messaging with us trying to strive. And one of the things that people find when they're in that space, of course, is fear and doubt and worry. And a shift of that, I think, is to see fear not as an enemy, but it's our invitation to grow. When we have that feeling of doubt, of worry, that we might be in the wrong space or we're above our depth or experience, is to see that as a positive sign that we're actually in that growth zone that everyone says that we should be in, and to reframe failure not as a sense of fear, but to be brave, live a little scared, and celebrate the fact that we're getting that emotion into our life because we are pursuing something that matters to us.
That was Andrew Horsfield, performance consultant, founder of the Better Life Lab, and author of new book Better.
If you're building a business, your reputation is everything, and a podcast can help build trust at scale and turn your expertise into authority. Sound Cartel's new Thought Leader package is designed for business owners who want impact without the overwhelm. So we handle the strategy, production and launch, while you can stay focused on what you do best. You can book your free 20-minute strategy call at soundcartel.com.au.
Now to leading teams through times of change. Does your leadership team have what it takes to keep your business competitive through disruption? Chris Power is an executive coach, leadership team coach, and founder of Power Projects. In a recently published white paper, she argued that periods of significant change can be the most dangerous and defining moments for organisations. In this conversation, Chris explains the 3 leadership practices that help businesses adapt: refocusing the leader's role, realigning teams, and readying the business for what's next. Now, Chris often talks about inflection points and inflection leadership in her work. So to begin, I asked her, what does inflection leadership actually mean, and how does it relate to the 3 practices of refocus, realign, and ready?
Well, when I first started thinking about the fact that we are facing into one of the biggest inflection points of history, really, geopolitically, technologically, demographically, and all the others, I realised really quickly that it was going to require a different kind of leadership to maximise the opportunity and to safely navigate businesses through these big inflection points. And when I thought about it in detail, I realised it actually all starts with the leader. So it was about refocusing your role as a leader, and then realigning your team, and thirdly, readying the business.
Terrific. And I'd love to dig a little bit more into some of those definitions because this is fascinating. So in a nutshell, Chris, what do you mean by refocusing, realigning, and being ready?
Well, role refocus, that's about actually lifting yourself out of the weeds. You know that old adage, just because you can doesn't mean you should. So moving out of all of the doing and saying, what is truly required of me as the leader right now? And that's not about what your preference is. Because at a senior leadership level, this is not about, hey, well, I really like going on all the sales calls, or I really like, nutting into, I don't know, whatever part of the complex process of business that I'm really into. It's about saying, what does the business and what does the team require of me right now? And yeah, so for most, it's about getting out of the doing. Part of that process is also about getting feedback from your team about some specific elements of leadership and what you might need to dial up in order to lead during this really interesting, uncertain time. So it's certainly about the leader doing that work. If a leader leads teams of leaders, then within those teams, they might also do that role refocus work. The second part of that is being clear on your role, is that your team is clear on your role. That makes sense. And that's where the team realignment process comes in. And that's essentially about the team aligning around, what are we here for? What are the rules of play? How do we want to engage with each other in order to maximise the opportunities of this inflection, and again, to safely navigate our business through this inflection point? And that's everything from what is the culture that we're driving, that we think will best support us and enable us to lead, and also enable the business to have that agility, that flexibility that we know is required in times of inflection. So what's important here is that it's not set and forget. It's a deliberate, ongoing practice about what is required of us as a team, how do we agree to work together, and how are we travelling against what we said we were going to be doing. The third element is that once we have that clarity from the leader and their role being refocused and the team being realigned around the strategy and the culture and the ways of working and developing the trust, then we're in a position to actually ready the whole business. And that's about saying having the right people in the right roles at the right time, focused on doing the right things in order, again, to best respond to, or as I've talked about in the past conversations I've had with you, getting on the front foot about what might actually be coming.
I wonder if you could tell me, how do these three practices work together? Does it matter if one is missing? Can you do just one in isolation?
It's a really good question. And because often the teams that I work with, the leader will come to me and say, or maybe a head of HR, people and culture, but the leader will come and say, can you come in and work with my team? And often it becomes really apparent that actually the first piece of work is with the leader. So whilst it's not a linear process, it is really, to maximise it, it is really beneficial to work with the leader first, and then once the leader is clear, then have the team come together. But that said, it doesn't always work in that way. And sometimes, as I said, I will come in and I will actually do work with the team, and then I'll connect with the leader through that. And we'll actually, through that work at the team, say, well, what do you need from the leader? And we'll realign the whole team around the leader's role, creating a trusting environment, and then what each individual team member, what their role will be.
No, that makes sense. I want to focus a little bit on realigning teams in particular. When it comes to that realigning teams piece, what do you think is the biggest mistake organisations make?
In realigning the team, it's probably actually missing it. I think it's actually that organisations often tend to jump to straight into readying the business. So we've got an issue, either we see an opportunity or we see a big risk coming our way, and we go straight into readying the business, which often means slashing budgets or, AI's here, let's quickly implement AI. Yet we haven't actually aligned the leadership team around how do we prioritise what we focus on, whose individual function might take priority, and how do we make those difficult decisions. So when we jump straight into readying the business, we've actually missed the work. And what ends up happening is you get a whole lot of noise. You get exec teams or leaders fighting with each other over budget. We end up putting in, let's say, AI, we put in poor processes. We don't change the processes. We just whack AI on top of it. Or we miss the opportunity to create something really fantastic by saying, let's restructure how we work. And in the case of AI, put somebody who's really great with customers sitting beside an engineer, and we look at what might be possible for our customers. So we get a better product, a better engineered product.
This all feels extremely timely. And I know there's a lot of leaders who will be listening now thinking, okay, I need to get started on these three leadership practices. If a company could only start with one of these three practices, and I know, there's issues with only one, but in terms of where they start, where should they begin and why?
I think if there was a starting position, it's probably the one that I described a moment ago where the leaders come to me. It will be around realigning the team, because it is actually about saying what's coming our way and how do we want to show up as a team. Again, not what our preference is, but actually what is required of us as a team of leaders that are leading a business. And often, if we're actually focusing on the culture, so the things that we encourage, discourage and tolerate, and the processes and systems that we're putting in place to drive that particular culture, then if we're focusing on that, that will be the time also for the overarching leader to have feedback on about how they show up and what they need to be focusing on. And it's about creating a trusting environment where we know that we're making decisions for the good of the whole business. And we can have the really difficult conversations that have to happen, because restructures, knowing when to stop a project that might be one function's pet project, that requires really big conversations and courageous feedback and all of that really good stuff that we know that teams that have a culture of trust and courage, they're able to actually make those difficult decisions. So that's where I'll probably go in, is actually at a team level.
That was Chris Power, Executive Coach and Leadership Team Coach. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. Follow Business Essentials podcast across social media and head to businessessentialspodcast.au for more. Business Essentials is a Sound Cartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schellberger, Nicole Goodman and myself. Technical production is by Pete Letts. I'm Grace Jennings-Edquist. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more Business Essentials next week.
Sound